Okay, so I would like to welcome Yomna to our summer Teachmeet for Islam at A-level and beyond, who's going to talk to us from the University of Cambridge about Al-Ghazali. Thank you, Yomna.
Thank you so much, Ross. Thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone is attending at this day. You know, it's the end of term. For us here, we already, the term has ended, and nearly the end of summer term for many schools. Thank you so much. So today, as Ross said, we will discuss this very controversial person, Al-Ghazali. He was influential, I think, and he is indeed one of the most famous Muslim scholars in history. He has been called the Mujaddid, he has been called the proof of Islam, the reviver of Ruth, would you admit, or is it that left to me? All right, sorry for this. So he has been called the reviver of religion, the proof of Islam, Hujjat al-Islam, but he has also lately been accused to be the person who single-handedly ended the Islamic golden age and put a stop to the philosophy and science in the Islamic Gate War. So hopefully today we will be able to shed some light on Ghazali's life and his work, and to show that the situation was a lot more complex than that. So Imam al-Ghazali's story, we will not highlight everything about his life, but enough to understand the era of Imam al-Ghazali, the major events, the culture, the scene, you know, what kind of ideas that existed at his time and what kind of events that happened. So we would be able to understand the situation of Imam al-Ghazali and his life, his work, his thoughts and crises, actually everything about Imam al-Ghazali, hopefully. So Imam al-Ghazali was born in, you can see here, the city of Tus, for a very poor family, humble family. Tus actually is northern Iran now, or at the time it was Khorasan. All of this, Iran, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, all of this was one area that is called back then as Khorasan, or known as Khorasan. And his father was a simple person, a Sufi lover, Sufi himself. Some say he was a Ghazal, like a person who was a wool carter, and that's why there is debate about his name, whether he is Al-Ghazali or Al-Ghazali with double Zai. And soon his father would realize that he is passing away, he is going to die. And so he entrusted Al-Ghazali and his brother Ahmad, who was also a Muslim scholar, but more in the realm of the heart or the Sufism, if you will. So he entrusted him and his brother, his son, both sons, to a Sufi scholar, a Sufi friend. And soon the money that he was left behind, the father was left behind, was spent on the two kids. They were sent to a school or a madrasa, and Al-Ghazali, like all classical students, scholars at the time, he learned philosophy, he learned Islamic law, usul al-fiqh, which is rather a sophisticated topic. And he studied with few scholars here in Tus, as Ibn Siraj, he studied with Al-Radkani, very renowned scholars. But we know that what have been attributed, that Al-Ghazali surpassed all of his teachers very, very quickly. And then Imam al-Ghazali moves to Jurjan, or Gurgan, as we know it in Arabic, which is near to the area that is called Al-Bahr al-Akhdar, same in northern Iran as well. Many great imams from this place, Imam al-Jurjani, were from there, both Jurjanis actually, because there are two of them. And this is a place of really, truly extraordinary knowledge. So he goes there, he studied with a scholar known as Abu Nasr al-Ismaili. He is about 15 years of age now. He is literally on his journey to knowledge, and he stayed with this sheikh and basically memorized Quran. Like all traditional scholars, he started to study Arabic. He mastered Arabic at this time at the age of 15. He studied Shafi'i fiqh with him, and he basically writes what we call now al-amali or al-taliqat, and this is a type of, or a mode of knowledge or learning that is no longer exist now, where the teacher or the lecturer would recite or say all of what he knows about the topic or the subject out of his head, memorization, and the student would write behind that teacher. We call this al-amali. So many scholars of the Middle Age or medieval scholars would have these al-amalis. This is something that is no longer exist, but they would write this, they would understand it, they would have like some sort of examination in this, but Imam al-Ghazali did not memorize all of this. And so after studying with this man, Abu Nasr al-Ismaili, Al-Imam al-Ghazali now on his way back to Tus again. And he tells the story that many of you may know, that where some robbers came and they basically robbed the caravan. And this was quite a common practice in those days. And they robbed the caravan. And so Imam al-Ghazali, I mean, you can imagine he is 18 years old, 19 years old, and he just studied and he just mastered all of this knowledge, Arabic and fiqh and philosophy. And he learned all of these, he wrote all of these notes, but he hasn't memorized it. And so he understood it, he comprehended it, but he hasn't memorized it. And so the thief takes his bag of books, and the Imam runs after the thief and begs him, please don't take my knowledge from me. And at that point, the thief laughs at Imam al-Ghazali and he says to him, what kind of knowledge is that a rich like me could steal it from you? And so, can you really call this a knowledge? The thief would say to Imam al-Ghazali, and Imam al-Ghazali says, at this point, I knew that God made him say that for me, that it's not a knowledge if it can be stolen from you by a thief, it's not a knowledge. And so he goes back to Tus, and he spent the next 3 years in Tus again, putting everything into memory. And he mentioned that about himself, that I have never, after this incident, learned anything until I put it into a memory. And this is a Muslim practice, by the way. Many people critique Islamic way of learning, that it depends heavily on hifz or on memorization, but it is a very traditional, that very rooted in the Islamic way of learning, that you have to put everything into memory. I know it's from a Western perspective, sounds like not effective perhaps, but so Imam al-Ghazali learned this very late, let's say at his 19. And so Imam al-Ghazali was a very gifted young man, and at 1 second, yeah. So at the age of, I was here, yeah. So Imam al-Ghazali, as I mentioned, that he was a very gifted young man at the age of 20 now, after he finished memorizing everything he learned from Abu Nasr al-Ismaili, he was upgraded actually to go to Tus and to study with to go to the city of Nishapur, which was a, 1 second, I just can't see you. I'm trying to, yeah, I'm sorry, it works now. Yeah, I can't see Roth now, at least. Okay, so Imam al-Ghazali went to Nisa, was upgraded to go to study in the city of Nishapur. In Arabic, we pronounce it as Nisapur, which is one of the sort of the centers of learning at this time, with a renowned scholar there by the name of Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni. And al-Juwayni was one of the leading scholars at the time, being a legal expert in Shafi'i's law school, and also a strong proponent in the Ash'ari school of Kalam or theology. And so this teacher must have had a large impact on al-Ghazali intellectually, as al-Ghazali himself was stay devoted to both, like, proponent of both aspects. So he is devoted to Ash'ari law school and to theological school, sorry, and to Shafi'i law school for the rest of his life. So he was one of his most illustrious students, and al-Juwayni called him actually, or named him in one of his books, the oceanic scholar. And this is a great thing too for a teacher to say about his student. And what is important, by the way, before I leave this point, that it's really important to know that Imam al-Ghazali is considered by many of us as a Sufi, and in reality, he is probably one of the most really, I think, striking critique of Sufism, as we will mention a bit. And if you read Ihya Ulumuddin, if you read At-Tabyin, if you read those books, you will find that he criticized Sufis, not Sufism, Sufis harshly. In fact, at the end of his book At-Tabyin, on the chapter of Sufis, he says that out of all, he would mention many groups, Muslim groups and sects. He would study these sects deeply, and he would study about their thought, their philosophy. And he would say in the last chapter, out of all these different groups, I have been talking about and mentioning and studying, the most deluded of those groups are the Sufis. And so he talks about the delusion of some of the Sufis, of course, in their way of dress. He talks about the delusion on their way of life, how they use religion for worldly gain, the pride in their hearts, and other practices. Despite his great influence later on in Sufism itself, and him being one of the factors that Sufism flourished in the Muslim or Islamic world. But Imam al-Ghazali is not primarily a Sufi. It is important to remember this. He is first and foremost a jurist and an usuli. He is a very important usuli, and by usuli I mean here a scholar who is a scholar of usul al-fiqh or legal theory or Shafi'i jurisprudence. And scholars in the Islamic history regarded Imam al-Ghazali as number 2 after Shafi'i in the history of Islamic sciences. And he has several books in fiqh. He has one famous book, known book, Al-Mustasfa. He has another book called Al-Mankhul. And when he wrote Al-Mankhul, his teacher, Imam al-Juwayni, the one he studies with him in Nishapur, he said about this book, Dafanani wa ana hay. For those who know Arabic, he says, he buried me while I'm still alive. In other words, he surpassed me and my work. And so Imam al-Ghazali is very, very, very important scholar in the realm of Sharia law and Islamic law and Shafi'i fiqh more than anything else in his life. He introduced something known as the six objectives of Sharia. I'm not sure if you are aware, familiar with this or not. The six objective or the six universal that Islam aims to promote life, faith, intellect, family, wealth, and dignity. These are, for Imam al-Ghazali, he introduced this notion. We call it maqasid al-Sharia. Until this day, every work on maqasid al-Sharia relies heavily on Imam al-Ghazali. It wasn't there before Imam al-Ghazali. The meaning was there, but as a science, this science uses lots of philosophy, uses lots of logic in order to justify the legalization of Islamic law. And for Imam al-Ghazali, everything in Sharia can be reduced to the protection of one of these six universals. And to him, there is no command or a prohibition in Islam that is not rational, none. So he is I want just to make this point, that is very, very, very great scholar in the realm of Sharia law and Islamic law more than anything else. But we know him as a Sufi. And in fact, he is considered, if we understand Sufism, he would be considered more Salafi than Sufi. When al-Juwayni died, the teacher of Imam al-Ghazali in 1085, al-Ghazali seems to stay in the city of Nishapur for a number of years, gaining a reputation as a brilliant young man who brought eventually books of his own on Shafi'i law primarily. But in 1091, the Seljuk Wazir, the Salajiqa, was a political system that was there at this time, not just in Iran at the time. It was in Baghdad, in Iran, in Turkey, different parts. But the Seljuk of Nishapur, Nizam al-Mulk, he decided to appoint Imam al-Ghazali as a professor of law in one of the, and a head actually of the college, in one of his colleges that he named after himself, Nizamiya College, it was called back then. And so he established those colleges, and the most prestigious one of them all was in Baghdad, where the Nizam al-Mulk sent actually Imam al-Ghazali to be the head of the college there and to be the professor there. Now, to understand why Nizamiya College have been established after all, well, at this time, the Fatimid Empire, who were Ismaili Shi'i Muslims, they created or possessed a serious political threat to the Abbasid at this time, as well as also religious threats. So they held obviously very different theology than perceived, the one that's perceived by Sunni Orthodox and of the Abbasid. And so they were a threat on both sides, religiously and politically. And so Nizam al-Mulk, the leader at this time, established these colleges to actually safeguard Sunni Islam at large, not a particular Sunni sect, although, of course, it was Ash'arite and it was school of jurisprudence. The predominant one was Shafi'i, but these non-sectarian, they are non-sectarian school of jurisprudence and Sufism, of course. So almost these three, Ash'ari, Shafi'i and Sufism, they always go hand in hand. And even in our modern time, you will find countries in South Asia, for example, Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, Malaysia, these are predominantly Ash'arite, predominantly Shafi'i, and they are predominantly Sufi historical development nonetheless. So these Nizamiya colleges were actually partly founded as a way to counteract the influence of the Fatimid Ismaili, or what they called them the esoterics. And as a result, the school's curriculum was often highly polemical and functioned as a refutation of schools of thought that they were considered to be esoterics, like the Ismailis, the other different philosophers, not just Ismaili, but mainly Ismaili Shi'i or Batinites. And so we can see this pretty clearly, that Imam al-Ghazali, as soon as he moved to Baghdad and to head the college, he actually, one of the first works that he published, let's say, or writes, after he arrived to Baghdad was this book, Fada'ih al-Batiniyya wa Fada'ih al-Mustadhiriyya. The scandal, the translation of the title is The Scandal of the Esoterics. So, and this is a kind of attack against the groups that were considered esoterics, again, as I said, the Ismaili and the Fatimites. And he has 5-6 books after that, all of them focus on the refutation of esoterics. But al-Ghazali would spend the following years, let's say a couple of years in Baghdad, as the highest position in the most prestigious college in all of the Islamic world, if you will. So he had a higher reputation. He was famous in having incredible rhetoric skill. Al-Ghazali's book it's very amusing to read his work, actually. He has a high intelligence. He was like, it's like the head of Cambridge or Oxford today, if you want. And so by every measure, he was an incredibly successful man at this point. He really shined. And let's put it this way, Al-Ghazali, at this point of his stage of his life, he really shined. And he engaged in debates in theology, in philosophy. He wrote many works in this subject. His knowledge was based on intellectual activity. He was a man of book learning at this point of life. And at least at this time of his career, that he writes some of this, his most important work, Al-Iqtisad fi al-I'tiqad, the book here, Moderation in Beliefs, is perhaps his most important work in theology or kalam and philosophy as well. And it was, we can see clearly that Al-Ghazali has strong adherence to theological school of Ash'aris in particular. And this school of kalam, they go they are actually, just to distinguish between kalam and falsafa. Kalam would mean the systematic theology that had engaged in debate and polemical writing with proponents of falsafa. It's not falsafa, so it is Islamic theology. That's why the word has made itself into English as well. When we say kalam, we don't mean Jewish theology. We don't, even though some Arab Jews have written kalam as a Jewish theology, but when we say kalam in our modern time, we directly mean Islamic theology, not any other theology. So it can be, we can distinguish between two. Falsafa actually is a more specifically philosophy that is derived from Greek sources primarily. And this was a debate that have been going on for centuries at this point already. And this later group of falsafa included famous philosophers like Ibn Sina, the Muslim philosopher, and Al-Farabi. So he also wrote Maqasid al-Falasifa, an introduction to the philosophies. In some translation, it's the aims of the philosophers, a very objective account of what the philosopher basically, believed, what they thought, what they preached. He is not criticizing, he is not responding, he is just mentioning everything about the philosophy and the philosophers of his time in this book, Maqasid al-Falasifa. And so then Al-Ghazali provided one of the most significant and impactful, let's say, edition of his larger debate with the writing of his Moment al-Tahafut al-Falasifa, the incoherence of the philosophers, also written in this time in Baghdad. And this book is a scientific critique of the philosophers, especially Ibn Sina. and to some degree, his predecessor also Al-Farabi. And so, but he is not, as some of us think, that or trying to discredit everything that the philosophers say, but rather to, if you can tell, fish out those parts where they go against Islamic teaching, and he criticized those aspects and these philosophers' writing. And in the book, he only criticized 20 different philosophical theories, and he deemed 3 of them to be completely unacceptable to Islamic teaching or Islamic theology. Number 1 is the idea that the eternity of the one word, which is a lot of the philosopher held. Secondly, the idea that God only has knowledge of universal, but not particulars. And lastly, the denial of the bodily resurrection, which also based on the affirmation to the immortal, immaterial soul. So Al-Ghazali claims that Ibn Sina and anyone actually who holds to those ideas are guilty of kufr or unbelief, and thus making themselves unbelievers, kuffar in Arabic in plural. And so Al-Ghazali clearly had a very, very strong theological beliefs, and he used this very prominent argumentative skills, if you will, to argue for these opinions. And so fame, money, power, prestigious position, you name it, he had it all. He got it all, but that did not really satisfy Imam al-Ghazali. And this is really the most important thing, that once we talk about Imam al-Ghazali abandoning his position, distributing his wealth, giving up, living in cognito. I know that many authors, scholars, they have their own versions of what happened, but if we stick, it's my opinion here, that if we stick to what Imam al-Ghazali said in his own autobiography, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, or The Deliverance from Error, it's also translated as Freedom and Fulfillment. It has lots of many translations. I think this is the safest thing to do, is to stick to what he says about what happened to him, to be in that crisis. And it's not about politics, it's not about, his own personal safety, because if you are worried about your own personal safety, you would not distribute your wealth or your money, you just take it and you just split. And I think the most important thing ultimately in this biography, it's very, very, very amazing work to read. I really recommend reading it, because I don't know, once I read it, I approached the book with my own, I feel that Al-Ghazali is telling me, come here, I have this thought, I have this, everything you think about at this moment. So it's a brilliant book. But if you reach to these 2 things, if we could succeed today in this particular presentation, in distinguish between 2 major things that happen in Baghdad to Imam al-Ghazali, everything else will fall into place, hopefully. So one is systematic doubt. And the other thing is his own intentions, his own sincerity, why I do what I do, why I write, why do I debate, why do I engage in this and that. And basically you could have a systematic doubt, and this will not lead you to spiritual change or spiritual renewal or spiritual crisis, if you will. And so we have these 2 major things that happen to Al-Imam al-Ghazali. And from his own childhood, Imam al-Ghazali mentioned that in his autobiography, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, or Deliverance from Error, from his own childhood, seeking truth, seeking indubitable knowledge was really put in himself. He mentioned that, and in his heart, if you will, from the age of childhood, really. And so since he was a child, he did not want to conform. He mentioned that, and what is really pretty much what everybody do, Christian child conform to whatever church he or she is born into. Usually, maybe later on they change, but they conform at one point. They might have their own doubts, they might have their own questions, but they conform at least outwardly. They do. So Imam al-Ghazali, he did speak about daring. He said, daring to abandon, the law of state of conformism and to go beyond this. And here he starts basically saying that he assumes always that it could be a reality that someone asked him to write this book, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, if you will. But I think it's very important to mention that the book is, if you read it, is systematic. And here he starts basically saying it's about he developed his ideas. You will see he was paving the way, and of course one can see it right from the very beginning. He went through major schools of thoughts, epistemological thoughts and possibilities of truth, if you will, but he was paving the way toward mysticism and spirituality. That's one thing. And he wanted indubitable knowledge that you cannot doubt. And since you begin with the premise that I cannot conform, all things are giving to me, I verify my own. And of course, Descartes, if you know, and Al-Ghazali, they are not the same. But when we talk about Descartes, the modern European philosophers, in his book Meditation, he also uses systematic methodological doubt. He was not a skeptic at all, but he sought certain knowledge, or what we call now in philosophy foundationalism, the idea that there is a basic principle which cannot be questioned and upon which all other knowledge can be built. And of course, Descartes and Ghazali are not the same, I mentioned, but we can talk about I doubt, therefore I am. This idea, I doubt, therefore I am, this idea of doubting the senses, that's exactly identical between both. And by the way, there was a Tunisian scholar who said that he saw a copy of Al-Ghazali's autobiography, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, Deliverance from Error. It could be Latin, it could be French, any translation, because it was very common at this time between scholars and or philosophers, of modern scholars, or philosophers, if you will. And he said he saw Descartes' handwriting in the margin of Al-Ghazali's autobiography. And so Descartes himself actually was familiar with Al-Ghazali's work, Deliverance from Error, and that what might explain, in the sense, this greatest of French philosophers, he might have borrowed at least some of the ideas from the Islamic philosophers. And in fact, if we move just a little bit beyond Descartes, we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He admitted later on in the Academy of Dijon, 1770, perhaps 677, later, a little bit later after Descartes, he said that Europe used to exist in a state worse than ignorance. We talk about dark ages, and help came, just to bittersweet what Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, help came from the least expected quarter, and it came from the stupid Muslim. It's yeah, I know. So it doesn't bother me, but he at least it came from the Muslim. It's an early notion of Islam.
I really like the start of that quote.
Yeah,
I like the start of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so the beginning, help came from the least expected quarter. But yeah, it doesn't bother me. At least suffice to say that he realized that enlightenment was an enlightenment that came through Andalusia and through Islamic writing and through Islamic. It's a relationship between culture, between civilization. You just take from which existed. You disagree, perhaps you digest, you present, but it's an idea that we find in Europe that they hardly accept, that the idea that of perhaps indebtedness of the Western intellectual tradition to earlier Islamic civilization. Anyway, and so Imam al-Ghazali now, he says that he will mention, he is trying to search for knowledge that he cannot doubt. And so what he did is he deeply studied the major schools that existed at this time in terms of possible source of indubitable knowledge. And he mentioned that, for example, he studied first Ilm al-Kalam, theology, Islamic theology, as we mentioned. And Imam al-Ghazali said, well, regarding to Kalam, he said that wafin bimaqsudihi ghayr wafin bimaqsudi, meaning it fulfills its own aim. It does not fulfill my own aim, because you say, what is Kalam actually? Kalam means basically, Kalam means basically that you base your premise on, you take your premise from the argument of your opponent. So it does not produce new knowledge, and also its not something that you need to, according to Al-Ghazali, by the way. For me, I consider it like one of the most important type of knowledge. But Al-Ghazali in Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of Islamic sciences, he says that the need for kalam is exactly similar to the need for guards on the path of pilgrimage. If you have highway robbers, then you need guards. If no highway robbers, then you don't need guards. Same thing for kalam. It depends on the context. You might need it, you might not. It's not essential, really, thing, really. And so this is the first part that he studied deeply, and he came to the conclusion that it's not that essential. Then he studied Ahl al-Ta'lim. Oh, sorry. Then he studied Ahl al-Ta'lim, and Ahl al-Ta'lim here is a reference to the Batinites or Ismaili Shi'i particularly, although it could cover also any non-Sunni sect that restricts its knowledge to one person or to few people, as the Imam, for example. Hence we talk about Imamite, the 12th Imam, the 7th Imams. And the problem with that for Al-Ghazali, he said that you claim to be learning from an absent Imam, because, you know, the Imamites, for example, believe that at one point the last Imam lives in Akalation. Very long story, many of you know this, but he is hidden anyway somewhere. And so for Imam al-Ghazali, he would say, how could you learn from someone who is not present? For him, the Sunni sect is pretty much egalitarian. Everyone has access to knowledge. All you need to do is learn Arabic, but not superficial learning of Arabic, of course, and you have access, roll your sleeve, go ahead, and there is no monopoly. You can do everything. Everyone has access to knowledge. And to explain this, one of my friends, actually, non-Muslim academic here in Cambridge, he compared, we were discussing this, and he compared the word of, let's say, Catholicism to Shi'ism, because you have this hierarchy. And so you have someone who is at the head, and he compared Sunni to Protestants because it is decentralized, if you will. And this is why Sunni don't have like authority in terms of knowledge. You write what you want, you say what you say. Then the cohesive scholar, either they accept, they reject, they argue with you. And this is the way, this is the spirit, but they don't basically restrict knowledge to one person, according to Al-Ghazali. And so, number 3 of the groups that Al-Ghazali deeply studied was the philosophers or philosophy. He goes later on into details about what in philosophy that is good, what in philosophy that contradicts Islam, that we cannot reconcile it with Islam, which is really, for him, the philosophy that should be rejected or cannot be reconciled with Islam is Greek physics or metaphysics. And so Al-Ghazali studied in details every single sect that exist at this time, the essence, the secrets, why people are the way they are, even the atheist of Islam. He was like an anthropologist in our modern time, if we say. And so he says that if I know that 10 is greater than 3, which is always true, and we are not talking about magic here. In fact, he says that even if a magician turns a stick into a snake, you will not doubt that 10 is greater than 3. And that's very beautiful, because Imam al-Ghazali here is saying that math is reliable. If it was reliable, then I would like my knowledge in the realm of metaphysics to be the same like in math. And he said that if someone does do this, I would not be surprised. I would not basically change my idea about it. And so Imam al-Ghazali starts from scratch, if you want, to build his knowledge, to find a solid foundation. And to do this, he began with questioning the senses. Can I trust my own senses? And he gave a couple of examples. I will just mention one of them. He said, look at the shade of a tree that your immediate impression, you will see it fixed. Come an hour later and you see that it has moved. It means that it was moving, but you could not detect the movement. It means that your eyesight deceived you. And so he asked, if I cannot trust my eyesight, which is to him is the highest or the strongest senses, what can we trust? So this then naturally also extended to other kind of knowledge, and that Al-Ghazali lists, which is reason. If we cannot trust our senses, then can we really trust reason? And he came to the conclusion that no, reason also is in fact fallible. And how did he reach to that conclusion that the senses deceive is because that he described he has a notion of the judge of reason. So the judge of the senses sensible, the judge of reason, and the judge of reason now declared the judge of senses unreliable. And now Imam al-Ghazali assumes something really particular, really, but he is different than Descartes here. He has his own assumption here that he said, assume that there is a judge above reason that once manifests itself, it will also render reason deputable. So even the rational faculty cannot be relied upon anymore. And so he was held through the personification of the senses, if you will. And the senses now are taking a step back at reason. And so this launched al-Ghazali into a huge personal and spiritual crisis. He becomes skeptical of everything, even though he was outwardly pious. He still practices his religion inwardly. He is unsure of anything. He cannot know if anything is true. Similar to Descartes also, Imam al-Ghazali questioned all assumptions. He was unsure if he could know anything at all. But this was only the first of his several personal crises. After working a number of years in Baghdad and being enormously successful man, again, something happened again in Baghdad, and he had another major or spiritual crisis. This was sparked by him realizing that all of these intellectual endeavors in my own whole career, he said that it has been based on selfish desire. He did not seek knowledge or have this higher prestigious teaching position for the sake of God, but instead he admits himself it was to gain fame and reputation. And so it was an egotistical reason behind this. This whole motivation for writing all of these works, all of these debates that was absolutely successful to the extent that he said about himself in Al-Munqidh, in his own autobiography, this book again, he said that I become intolerable. That because I win every debate, all people, he criticized everybody. He criticized Hanafi, he criticized Sufi, he criticized philosophers. So he also appeared to question the pure rational approach to religion that he dedicated his life to up to this point. As he himself would quote, I would say, or I quote him, next I attentively considered my circumstances and I saw that I was immersed in attachment which had encompassed me from all sides. I also considered my activities, the best of them being public and private instruction, and that in them I was applying myself to sciences unimportant and unuseless in this pilgrimage to the hereafter. Then I reflect on my own intention in my public teaching, and I saw that I was not directed purely, or it was not directed purely to God, but rather was instigated and motivated by quest for fame and widespread prestige. So I become certain that I was on the brink of crumbling bank and already on the verge of falling into the fire, unless I set about mending my ways. And so Imam al-Ghazali now, I'd like to highlight here, and for 2 months, some scholars extended it more than 2 months, but for 2 months, Imam al-Ghazali was in a state of sophistry, in a state of, he could not solve it in any way, because you cannot solve it with senses, through senses, you cannot solve it through rationality, because of that possibility that reason is not reliable, because it became debatable now. And the physician actually gave up on Imam al-Ghazali. He now could not talk, could not drink, could not eat, and physician actually gave up, and they told his family, you take him to a psychiatric. We are physician, we give up on him, we cannot solve it. And at this stage of life, it seemed that he decided that he wanted to take a new approach to reaching true knowledge. One, not through books or arguments or debates or intellectual conceptual knowledge, but rather through a direct experience of mysticism and seclusion. And so he left money, and he made some money actually, and he made arrangements to his family to be taken care of, but he gave away the rest of the money to charity. And he told his superiors that he was going to Hajj or pilgrimage to Mecca, and he had his brothers take actually his place as a teacher in Nizamiya College in his absence. But he wasn't actually going on a pilgrimage. He was going in a long journey, both inwardly and outwardly, to discover true knowledge through mysticism. So he left basically everything behind, including his family, and he just wandered. He appeared in Damascus for a while, closing himself off in the famous Umayyad Mosque. Here is the mosque, very, one of the early photos for Umayyad Mosque. And Al-Ghazali did speak about returning back to teaching. I just wanted to highlight this before I forget. He abandoned teaching during this period, but he did speak about returning to teach, that he left teaching, actually not returning, he left teaching in Baghdad. And many scholars, many non-Muslim academics actually, who say that Imam al-Ghazali, for example, did teach here and there in similar circles in Baghdad, but no, he never did. And in fact, when he returned to teaching in Nishapur later on, it was Fakhr al-Mulk, son of Nizam al-Mulk. You remember Nizam al-Mulk that we mentioned at the beginning? Son of Nizam al-Mulk, who basically put enough pressure on Imam al-Ghazali to return to teaching. But he had this beautiful relationship with his father, Fakhr al-Mulk, or Nizam al-Mulk, that he was, both actually were assassinated, like at the hand of the esoterics or the Batinites. And yeah, so in fact, the word assassin came into English. It's derived from the word hashashin, the Arabic word hashashin, which is the movement that the esoteric were leading or having at this time, where they killed Nizam al-Mulk and his son Fakhr al-Mulk. After 2 years of devotion and spiritual exercises, he moved from Jerusalem, or from Damascus or Dimashq to Jerusalem. He stayed there in the Dome of Rock in Qabbat al-Sakhra in Al-Quds. And from there, he went to the town Al-Khalil in the West Bank on the tomb of Prophet Ibrahim. And he made 3 pledges there, actually. Never visit a royal court, never accept royal gifts, never debate anymore with anyone. And for the rest of his life, he never returned to debate any again. And from there, he decided to go to Medina and Mecca for Hajj. And for 11 long years, he remained on his journey of self-discovery and the search for the truth. We actually know basically nothing about what he did, where he was. For 11 years, he was gone. Actually, he wandered around the Islamic world, praying, worshiping, doing other spiritual activities. And after those 11 years, he returned back to Tus or to Nishapur, a changed man. And he returned to Nishapur, saying, ultimately, that I found the solution came through a light from God that has cast into my breast. بنور قذفه الله تعالى في الصدر. That was the solution. That I found it, a light that came to my heart from God. And actually, one might ask, I actually asked this question, all of this fuss, and then you would say it's a light from God, not really logical, argument, not really mathematical proof, not really something in the perhaps DNA. We live in a time that we need tangible proof or something. So Imam al-Ghazali say no. It was definitely just a light in the heart that God has placed in my heart, and that's it. And he is considered the revival, the scholar of the 5th century. He was described that as someone who we never saw, or people at this time, they never saw a man like him. We talk about his knowledge, not his appearance or anything else. And all of he says, he said that it's all heart, not reason. Don't ignore reason. Imam Ghazali would mention that later on, because once he had this light, he said that the other issues came into place. Now the senses became okay, the reason became okay. So it's that we have now this light, and we don't turn our back to reason forever. No, that's a very important point that I wanted to highlight. So now we try so he returned back to Tus, actually, and Nishapur. He never stayed or taught anything ever in Baghdad after this. He was avoiding, actually, let's say, the Nizamiya college and everything to do with his students and his old place, debates, teaching, everything, never returned back again. And so we mentioned Kalam briefly, so I will not discuss, I mentioned his position Kalam, but about the Batinites, he systematically wrote against the esoteric, the Imamite, in the scandal of the esoteric Fadaih al-Batini, and he wrote so many books after that. It's not the first book. He wrote so many books, just the refutation of the Batinites or the esoterics. He never actually shied away. I'm saying this because there are some Orientalists who claim that Imam al-Ghazali really ran away from Baghdad fearing for his life. And that's not the case. And had it been the case, he would not later on return back all the way to Tus Khurasan, which is really near Mashhad, the place of their operation, if you will. They killed already many, systematically. They killed many politicians, they killed many scholars, they had a lot of intimidation, but he returned and stayed back with them, and he was he did not shy away from this. And al-Ghazali has spent his life in search for knowledge, and he founded it in mysticism, but that does not mean that he gave up all his intellectual activity. He indeed continued to write, even if he has also also very critical to the kind of speculative rationalist approach to God by the end of his life, but he was also very critical to Sufism, as I mentioned. He was very critical to Hanafi, as I mentioned, other school of Islamic law. And in fact, it was during this 11 years of living in seclusion that we mentioned, we don't know where he went, but during this 11 years that he authored his most famous and important work, and one of the most significant, actually influential book in intellectual history, this book, Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the religious sciences. The importance of this work cannot be overstated. Some claim that it is the most widely read Islamic book after Quran and Hadith literature. And it came to have a significant impact on the future trajectory of Muslim intellectual actually thought in general. It is a massive moment at 40 volumes. The book is a kind of summary of the principles and practices of Islam in general. He would mention the logic of Islam. He would mention the philosophy. You will find all sorts of sciences there, spirituality. As a result, al-Ghazali and Ihya Ulumuddin is often seen as being responsible for the wider acceptance of Sufism generally in the Islamic world, and the incredible flourishing of Sufism in the Middle Ages. And we know that he is greatly remembered, not just in the Islamic world, but also here in the West and other parts of the world as well. His discussion and debates in philosophy and falsafa often particularly discussed. He employs rationalism and philosophical speculations method that often perhaps arrive to different conclusions, but he did use them. And this takes us through the criticism against al-Ghazali that rationality was, in fact, we know that it was very important to al-Ghazali, but it also brings us to the discussion while he is remembered as one of the most influential thinkers in the history, philosophers perhaps in the history, especially in Islamic history, he is also often harshly criticized today. And we know this person, the scientist or the celebrity scientist, Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, he's one of those who held lots of lectures, lots of talks, accusing Imam al-Ghazali of being the person who single-handedly ended the Islamic Golden Age by being opposed to the philosophies, to the science. He even claimed that Imam al-Ghazali considered mathematics to be the work of Satan, which is ridiculous, of course. This whole position really problematic. It has become kind of to some degree, at least common knowledge for some people. People assume these things about Imam al-Ghazali when a lot of I doubt people have read Imam al-Ghazali's work. I'm sure they don't. If they read it, they would understand al-Ghazali's position. He certainly did not think that mathematics was the work of Satan. He didn't even dislike mathematics. He was often critical to the philosophers, as we discussed previously, but he did not reject all of their ideas or all of their methods. And all of this in all of this, mathematics was in fact of the things that he liked the most, because mathematics, in fact, allowed for his scientific certainty that satisfied Imam al-Ghazali to a large degree, actually. He even stated himself in his autobiography, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, I quote this, "Great indeed the crime against religion committed by anyone who supposed that Islam is to be championed by the denial of these mathematical sciences." So, but also Al-Ghazali in general senses, the view of Al-Ghazali as the enemy of rationality, the rational thought, is a very inaccurate view, not just for Al-Ghazali, for the history of Islamic civilization in general. It's true that he criticized philosophers, but this criticism, by the way, coupled with his great opportunity for the popularity of philosophy in the Muslim world and the popularity of Greek philosophy toward in the Muslim world, but he steers the Islamic intellectual world away from Greek philosophy toward the Ash'ari kind of theology, and he also, as a result, this become a common popular, especially in the Arab-speaking world. So, did Al-Ghazali condemn philosophy and science? With all in mind what we have mentioned today, there are a few things that we need to say. Firstly, Al-Ghazali, if you notice in all of his book, he criticizes the Muslim philosophers and not philosophy. So the incoherence of the philosophers, the maqasid of the philosophers. And when he say philosophy, even when we say philosophy experience a decline after Al-Ghazali, we are talking here about specifically the philosophy or the falsafa scholar, that is the philosophy that is derived mainly from the Greek sources, and which is sometimes downplay the importance of religious revelation in favor of pure rationalism. It does not mean that philosophy in a broader sense died or disappeared at all. Kalam could be said is a kind of philosophy. Sufism, which is flourished over the coming centuries after Al-Ghazali, also have some elements of philosophy, intellectual speculation, different sources of philosophy. So philosophy included influence from thinkers like Aristotle school to have a huge impact in Islamic intellectual, would often indirectly through also Sufism or Kalam, but even Falsafa tradition itself did not necessarily die. Even the Greek philosophy did not necessarily die. They soon adopted new environment, flourished in a different circumstances, survived in a different forms, but it did not die. So he also actually developed his own philosophical work, which is the moderation of belief, which is a constructive. So he did this deconstructive work, but this work was a constructive. And it's one thing to say that philosophers believe this. We would say, for example, how did the existence come into being in Plato's philosophy? Or what's the prime mover or the four causes of Aristotle's philosophy? That's one thing, that's their own thing. And even the Greeks today, they don't subscribe to this. So this is something that, you know, is part of the history of the idea, but it's a great injustice to say that Al-Ghazali contributed to the downfall or the decline of science, and it's a great ignorance or abandoning of the history of the Muslim nations on what happened historically. You can see the map here. The Muslim world is, and just try to remember, in 1258, we have the Mongols destroyed Baghdad, literally. And it was simply the Viking of the East destroying everything. Then we have so Baghdad is here. Then we have 1492, the destruction of the Islamic presence in Andalusia, the ethnic cleansing, if I would say, and they would not tolerate any Muslim in Andalusia. So after 1492, the center of the heart between both the wings, Baghdad and Andalusia, we have the crusade around 1099, when Imam al-Ghazali was already on his way back to Baghdad. So the two wings, the heart, were already destroyed. The two wings were destroyed, the heart was already occupied. How can Islamic civilization continue to flourish as usual? So it's unfair actually to blame Imam al-Ghazali for what happened and for the decline of science and knowledge. Yeah, thank you so much for, that's everything, but I'm happy
Yomna, that is just amazing. And I've just scribbled down so many notes and I've got so many questions. I might just pose a couple to you and let people either unmute or type in the chat. I mean, that was just, I knew bits of that, but just to get that sort of the setting and the picture, and for me, knowing the context and kind of how it all connects. And I teach the OCR spec. I don't know what specs everyone else does, but there's so many things there. Like we cover him in Sufism, we cover his Kalam argument for the God, you know, we cover the incoherence of the philosophers and the link to, you know, the Ash'ari schools of law. It's just, I just thank you so much. That like overall picture for me has just been really, really helpful, even though I felt like I knew quite a lot anyway. Like it was really good. And I loved that personal touch of like when you read the deliverance from error and how it spoke to you. And I think that's why he has sort of persevered in the Muslim world, you know, that his views have like had that great influence, you know, because people have found that writing. But I've just got so many questions. So first of all, I just wondered, was Tus and Gorgan, where the area where he was, and he was a student, was that was Sunni at the time, whereas nowadays in modern day Iran it's Shia. So I just wanted to check that was Sunni at that point, was it?
So there was distinction between two. This area was predominantly Shi'i, actually.
Okay.
But and they have this political threat toward each other and argument, religious or like theological threat against each other. But it was this area. So the area where Imam al-Ghazali was in Tus was predominantly Shia, like today in Iran. But Baghdad, other parts of the world, was predominantly Sunni. Al-Abbasid has extended its power to Iran and to all of this area, and they have this many rulers who went to Iran at that time have been assassinated because of this tension between both Sunni and Shia.
So he's like lived through that tension from
Absolutely.
a child, like from a child, you know, he's lived in an area where he's, you know, from like 15, wasn't it? He's seen that tension, because we cover him in OCR where we look at apostasy and what he writes about apostates. And it is quite, you know, like when you say he's a controversial figure, I thought, well, yes, he is. Some of the things he says nowadays, you know, and what he says about apostates, and you kind of set it in that context where he is so, you know, he says such strong things against the Ismailis and the, you know, that kind of thing. And you said it in that context. So yeah, that really helps me. And then another thing is the criticism of esotericism, is the esoteric approach, and how a lot of what you said about the Sunni approach is like, you get the Quran, you roll your sleeves up, you get going. I thought that was fantastic. But then when I've taught about Imam al-Ghazali to do with his religious experience later, and I'm thinking about him having that experience, does that then mean that only some people have that knowledge because they've had that experience? Does he shift over that way a bit? Like this is a knowledge, and like my understanding of Sufism is that there's a kind of journey you go on with you go delve deeper and you get more knowledge as you go. So is that something he changes with? Because does he later, I felt he later says, oh, you know, you need to have this experience to fully understand as well. So does that mean that there is a kind of, some people have got more knowledge than others, or what do you think?
Well, he actually against this idea that some people may have more knowledge than other, or some not more knowledge. Well, yeah, obviously some people would have more knowledge than other, but not because
or access to, I guess.
Not because of its access to wisdom, or would be restricted to them. Some wisdom that we don't know. For example, with regard to some of the things that he opposed the esoterics, Imam Ibn Sina, for example, Ibn Sina and esoterics would look to the revelation, would give precedence to the reason over revelation. Imam saying that the reason has higher rank than revelation, and that the revelation were actually for, let's say, the idiots or the mass people, but revelation is for those who have higher ability to think and higher ability to reach to the wisdom. Imam al-Ghazali opposed this idea at all. And he would say that, no, Ibn Sina, for example, would consider drinking alcohol is okay. And he would say it's not allowed for the mass people because it might intoxicate their money. They might drink excessively until they become drunk. But for me, yes, the revelation would say it's not allowed, but there is a wisdom, and I reach that wisdom. The wisdom here is that I do not become intoxicated, and my rationality is the biggest thing for me. So it's okay to drink. For Imam al-Ghazali, he would say no. Whether you or the past or the people with higher knowledge, it would be the same. Revelation would come before your own reasoning or justification. So he actually was this against this idea that some people would have access or revealed. He would have the idea of kashf, let's say. He would understand it through the spirituality, but this does not mean that people would abandon reason, or would abandon, some people would reach. He was actually against Sufism and harshly criticized them when they say that this scholar or this person is a saint. He reached something that we don't know.
That's what I was wondering, because I wondered if that's what he was doing for his 11 years. Was
absolutely no.
Was he looking for someone or trying to follow a path, and then he realized, I don't know, I'm just,
Absolutely, absolutely. He is a big critique for Sufism in this part. He would say that stay connected. He was one of the reasons that spirituality flourished. But again, he was harshly criticizing the Sufism when they say that person has all knowledge. He is a is a saint. He was against this idea.
And we got a question here from Chris, who personally asked for this about Al-Ghazali. So I was so happy when I saw your name come up, Chris, who wondered what Al-Ghazali's view would be on ijtihad, because it's a form of reasoning.
Well, this is this is a very good question. This is very important to know about Al-Ghazali, because when I said that he's a jurist, his work primarily focusing on ijtihad and primarily rejecting athari. So Ash'arite actually, Ash'arite would give would not stick to the text or to the scripture resources like Atharis or Hanbalis. We have today Ash'ari, Maturidi, Mu'tazili, and Hanbali in Saudi Arabia, for example. So he is the first one to introduce maqasid, which is to look on the wisdom behind the ruling. Why is this not allowed? Why is this allowed? Why is this prohibited? He is the first one to introduce this realm of maqasid in the ijtihad. And he would say that you have to look at those 5 or 6 objectives. When are they applied here or there? Why is this prohibited? Because of this. And the way he deduct reasoning or deduct legislation, or this is ijtihad actually, was through his new realm of science, which is known today as a maqasid.
I love maqasid. There's a really good video on that I use with my students, and I love the link for me with OCR with like natural moral law and the primary precepts of natural moral law is so similar. But just to build on that, so would Ghazali say that anyone has that ability to do ijtihad, or is there only certain people who have that? You know, we have this idea, are the gates open shut? Is there some people who can do it, others who can't?
Yeah, this is a very modern idea, by the way, that the door ijtihad is closed. All of these scholars at this time, for them, everyone can do ijtihad. Everyone, a scholar, proper scholar who has mantiq, who has logic, so mantiq means logic. Sometimes, forgive me, because I teach Arabic as well. You see, if the board here is Arabic, I sometimes switch to Arabic, assuming everyone understands what I'm saying. I'm sorry for this. So,
Shukran.
So he taught logic. He was very interested in the idea of rationalizing Sharia. He was very interested in this idea. And for them, they didn't have this notion that ijtihad is closed. How? The ijtihad is closed, or this idea that the door ijtihad closed started to flourish after the Ottoman or the fall of the Ottoman Empire. When
it was a kind of protection, I guess.
Yeah, when the modernization with the secularization of education and the modern nation states, it's a lot of changes that Muslims have found, and then this declaration that the door of ijtihad has closed. There is a very, very important book or in this field for Wa'il Hallaq. I'm not sure if you are familiar with his work.
Yes.
So Wa'il Hallaq has this question or has this article, did the door of ijtihad close or not? So
we studied that in OCR.
He argues that no, it's not closed, and anyone can.
I've got another question, so this is brilliant. So firstly, would Al-Ghazali agree with Sufi ideas on pluralism? Yeah, that's a very good question, actually.
I'm not aware really if he discussed this.
Would he say that, because those are the 3 things he says about the philosophers, it's like if someone doesn't deny those, Could someone be of a faith and say the world isn't eternal and that God is involved in the particulars and that there is a bodily resurrection, and therefore he would say that they are not non-believers, maybe?
They would be non-believers for him, absolutely. So he is considering actually Ibn Sina as a non-Muslim. Him, Al-Ghazali would say, Ibn Sina is definitely, for me, he's a non-Muslim. Even though Ibn Sina would pray with people and would consider himself a Muslim, a Sunni Muslim, actually, not even a Shi'i or esoteric Muslim. But so
even another Sunni Muslim isn't on the right path, according to Al-Ghazali.
Yeah, but only these three ideas, only these three, by the way, these three for Al-Ghazali will take the person outfold of Islam in general, Sunni or Shia.
Yeah.
The other 17 would take the person outside of the Sunni Islam.
Okay.
But he was still Muslim, like Shi'i Muslim perhaps.
Okay, but if you go across that line, I don't think he would. Does he ever write about other faiths at all, like people of the book or anything like that, or is he not concerned with that?
Yeah, he has about other faith. He wrote, so he dedicated his life actually exploring. He wrote even about atheists of that time, even though there was Zanadiqa perhaps. So we call it Zanadiqa, not atheist as a modern notion, but he did wrote about the Christian and Judaism. He did write about all other faith and tradition. But the idea of pluralism, do you mean pluralism internally as Muslims with different sects, or pluralism? I don't understand what you mean. Pluralism in general, like faith.
Maybe Tyra could maybe explain. Oh, Tyra, sorry. If you want to Tyra, will say. Is that? Go on, say.
Yeah, sorry. We do the currently the AQA spec, but we're thinking about changing. But I'm quite interested in this view because we talk about Sufism and pluralism, i.e. there are multiple ways of understanding the truth, and there are multiple ways of seeking the truth with God. Are all of those equal paths? That is a concept within Sufism, and I'm just not sure where Al-Ghazali sits within that concept. Is it more to do with the heart becoming and receiving union with God? If that's what's important, does it matter which faith tradition that you come from? Or is it more that you have to have stuck to the principles and tenets of Islam in order to achieve oneness with Allah?
Yeah, very good, very good. Yeah, I think it's the latter. So he is very traditional in this point, that you have to follow the revelation, which of course means the Islam or the teachings of Islam. And after that, anything. So in Ihya Ulum al-Din, he would mention every single aspect of Islam, how to pray, why we pray, the wisdom of prayer, why we do it this way, how to find your spirituality, even education, how to teach, even in, so we have in education, mentioning the education, we have here many of our students, PhD students, who are focusing on Islamic curriculum based on Al-Ghazali's perspective and thoughts and insight. So he would, yes, definitely say that it is Islam first, and anything else, your heart will find its way. Obviously, so the idea of pluralism at this time, it was a time that is full of tension. You can imagine that he is fighting esoterics. He would not say that you will find your God the way you find, as long as you find your God, that's okay. No, that's not Al-Ghazali. He is very traditionalist in this regard. He is very, very, to the extent that some people would consider him, if we have this classification today, Al-Ghazali would be considered as a Salafi. So he is not even a Sufi in a term of pluralism and intra-faith and interfaith. No, he was not. He is very clear that the only way to do it is the Sunni way, and that's why the Nizam al-Mulk appointed him to protect the Sunni from being, because had he not been appointed and had he not been in this position to refute the esoterics or the other philosophers, some scholar would say that Sunni would be disappeared. So he was fighting at that let's say gate against esoterics, against other faiths, not against them personally, but against the philosophy and the theology of them, against Maturidis who give precedence to reason more than revelation. So I don't think he had this idea of pluralism.
Do you think at a different time, in a different context, he might have said different? I guess it's obvious he probably would have said different things, but maybe he wouldn't have. He might have, had a different approach if there wasn't that political sort of danger.
Perhaps, but he said about himself that from early age I was daring. I was daring to oppose every single philosophy and everything, single way of thinking. So it's kind of his natural disposition, maybe, that he is that person who dares to say, no, it's not this and you are wrong, even to Sufis. So even though Sufis, for them, Al-Ghazali is the highest figure, but reading about Sufis in Al-Ghazali's discourse and Al-Ghazali's work, you would realize that how come, like, you are considered to be a Sufi. So I don't think he would have different opinion. He is very, very eager to oppose, let's say. And he said that about himself, I became intolerable.
I thought that was amazing when he said that he became intolerable, and the thing about the fame and the power and his light was shining. But let me come back to the other questions. So we've got here, does faith come before reason for him then? If we think about that balance, I was thinking of the Mutazilites and the Ash'arites and Ibn Rushd and all that sort of thing. Yeah,
absolutely. That's why Ibn Rushd later on criticized his work, Tahafut al-Falasifa, and Tahafut al-Tahafut, the incoherence of the incoherence. But yes, for him, absolutely, faith will come. And this is his whole journey that I was looking for faith. And for him is faith comes first. So for example, Maqasid, if we talk back about Maqasid and Ijtihad, so he would say, there is new issue that is not mentioned in Quran and Sunnah. What should we do? We look on the spirit, on the objectives, these 6 objectives that Sharia needs to protect. But it has to have a link to Quran and Sunnah first. So you don't make it a source of legislation, Maqasid, by its own. At this time, Al-Ghazali, even though Al-Ghazali introduced these 6 objectives, so he would say that's just to show you that faith for him comes before reason. So it's not unrestricted reason that you will gonna work your mind and, as we said, roll up your sleeves and do. No, for him, you have to stay within the realm of Quran, Sunnah, Ijtihad, Ijma', Qiyas, these 4 things. Later on, we'll find a scholar called the Tufi in the 13th century. Al-Tufi would say, building on, he is Iraqi scholar as well, Hanbali scholar, not Ash'arite. Some accused him to be a Shi'i, but Al-Tufi is not a Shi'i, definitely. He's a Hanbali, he's a Sunni. But Al-Tufi...
Tufi or Kufi? How do you spell it?
With Ta, with T.
Tufi, okay, Ta.
Tufi. So Tufi would say, well, maslaha or interest, public interest, would be precedent over Quran and Sunnah. I will give it precedence over Sunnah. Now he is contradicting Al-Ghazali, who is for decades was the principal in Maqasid. Later on in our time, we would find scholars who say, this fiqh or legal theory, Islamic legal theory is very complex, very complicated. We would just work on Maqasid without anything. So working on Maqasid alone, meaning that you will just work with reason without revelation. For example, they would mention the idea that can a Muslim woman who lives in the West, now we have different circumstances, different contexts, can a Muslim woman who lives in the West marry a non-Muslim? We know that in Islamic law, with ijma', with anonymous agreements or unanimous agreements, that it is no, big no. A Muslim woman would marry only a Muslim woman. Maqasid scholar nowadays would say we would look at the objective. So we need to protect life, we need to protect family, we need to protect lots of things. And these are the maqasid of Shafi'i. We will consider maqasid a science in its own, a way of legislation. And one of the predominant renowned scholar who passed away 2 years ago, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, said, well, it's okay. So we start to have a new legislation, new reasoning, if you say, new ijtihad. That's why I say that the gate of ijtihad has never been closed. Based on Al-Ghazali's work, even though I'm sure Al-Ghazali will oppose what the scholar is, how the scholar is using and applying Maqasid core discourse now, but he is the one who initiated this. So it shows us that he really appreciated and admired reasoning. within.
Oh, go on. I was just going to ask another question here from somebody else, AYID. I'm not sure who you are, but welcome. Asking about the Kalam cosmological argument. Okay. How do we know that causation can exist atemporally? In other words, can causation exist outside of the universe where there's no time? If there's no time, there's no movement. How can there be causation? I don't know if you can read the question there. The Kalam argument, and I don't know if any of you teach it with the, is it Hibbert's Hotel? I always try and explain this to the students. Like, I don't know if anyone's managed to do that very well. Please let me know. So this is Ghazali's Kalam cosmological argument about the universe starting at a point in time.
Yeah.
How much do you know about that, Yomna?
Well, I think if we look at Al-Ghazali's understanding of what do I call it? Of understanding of the beginning of world, because scholars would say that God is eternal and the world is eternal. If God is eternal, then the world, God had not created the world, it was also eternal. To the extent that, for example, Ibn Sina would say, if God is merciful, how would he be merciful to know nothing? So he is merciful and God is eternal and God's contribution or attribution are eternal with him. So how would his contribution or his attribution of merciful or being merciful be towards nothing? So it must have been some creatures, must have been, there is like sky, but in Quran, for Al-Ghazali, God would say that he created heaven, he created human, he created Adam, and so they are not eternal. But for Al-Ghazali, I don't know if I understood your question. Al-Ghazali would say, I would give precedence to the revelation, even though if you think that God, the world or could have been eternal with God.
Could I unmute and sort of explain? Yeah, so I'm 17, so I'm a student at A level, right?
Wow.
So yeah, I was just looking into the Kalam cosmological argument, right? So it starts off with everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. So I was just looking at some of the objections, and it's similar to the fallacy of composition, where if we go outside of the universe, some physicists say that time may not exist. And if time doesn't exist, there's no movement, right? And if there's no movement, then there can't be any causation. Because Al-Ghazali relies on the fallacy of infinite regress to prove that there must be an uncaused cause, if you get what I mean. But if there's no time outside of the universe, how can causation exist?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what is the response of Al-Ghazali on this point, to be honest. But
I guess it would be that the universe, that time didn't exist before the universe, but time started with God when God created the universe. There was no time before the universe was created.
It's eternal. It is not, yeah.
So time, space, all of physics, everything inside the universe, all the laws and everything we have, that began when God created the universe. Now, the thing is, if you were to say it never began and it's been there eternally, you've got infinite regress, then you don't need a God to have started it, because it could just have been there forever, you know.
Yeah.
But by God starting it and creating it in that moment, time started in that moment. I guess that's the crux of the argument, really. I mean, anyone else can chip in if you want to say something.
I think our definition of universe might be different. What I'm referring to, you know, the Big Bang, right, at the start of the singularity. Just before that, because the time was created at that singularity according to the Big Bang theory. Just before that, in whatever world we're in, just before that, time didn't exist. So that's the sort of plane I'm talking about, that realm where, you know, can causation exist in that realm? Because I've heard some people can say that causation can exist, like, without time. And some physicists say that causation can't exist without time. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not, I can't remember what did Imam Al-Ghazali say about this, but for example, the idea of the Bing Bong theory, where the scholar would say that everything was already, if you remember, who would remind me?
Lemaitre, the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
Lemaitre, maybe.
Sorry?
Was it Lemaitre?
Yeah, exactly. So they would say that that everything that happened was already like there, and so the God was. So he would actually be inconsistent with the modern idea of the Big Bang theory, actually. But with regard to the time, he was eternal, and the time existed with his creations. That's why he created the days. In Islamic theology, they would say that the week have been, or the days have been created or the universe have been created in 6 days. And so at this time, the time have been created. So everything was eternal before then. There is the concept of time is not there before.
Yeah, time wasn't there before the Big Bang. Time is a consequence of the Big Bang, but that had to have been started. I guess the whole point of the Kalam argument, that had to have been started for time to make sense. There must have been a beginning point. Is that the kind of argument?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess the Big Bang theory wasn't there at Ghazali's time, so he's not going to have written much about the kind of physics of it and everything. But yeah.
Absolutely. So the idea that the eternity of the world, that the world would be co-eternal with the God, which is really absolutely how could God be the creator of the universe, has been, if the universe has been always there. Ibn Rushd would say that in his Tahafut al-Tahafut, or the incoherence of the incoherence, he would respond in Ghazali saying that it is semantic. And if we look at, astrophysicists today, who are atheists, actually, who are not Muslims, who would say that the world is 13 billion years old, they are subscribing to Imam al-Ghazali's actually point of view, not knowingly, because the big point at the moment, we will go back to the when time was equal zero. And they admit that nothing precedes this. And I think it's very, very important to realize that, and admitting that they talk about there could be no matter before matter, in a sense. Because
I kind of always look at it like, even like all those videos about the Big Bang theory, even evolution, they say, oh, something happened, It's like something happened and it all started. And that something is what people call God, I guess, the cause of that happening. Oh, well, I'm so happy. I wonder, how did you know about this? Was it just
that's brilliant. That's fascinating. Yeah.
I don't know who you are. Are you studying Islam at A-level? Do you mind me asking you?
No.
You're just interested in it and came along. Oh my goodness.
So I wasn't born in this country. I came here when I was like in year 4 or something. So obviously a lot of people around me had different ideas. So it led me to like sort of introspect into what I believed, and it just, it was a massive rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Oh wow, you are a future philosopher. Oh my goodness. Look at that. And then thank you so much for coming. Your teachers are really, really, really lucky to have you in your classes. I'd love to have you in my class if you're coming to this kind of thing and listening. And yeah, I mean, just that whole concept of the influence of Ghazali on the whole Western philosophy as well. Has anyone else got another question they'd like to ask? Or perhaps something else you'd like us to look at in the future? As part of our group, sometimes people come up with things they'd like to cover. I'd like to meet like once a term at least, or more if people want to. If there's anything in particular you need resources on, or you want to have help with, then now's the time to ask if you want, or you can email me, and I can try and find someone. It might be Yomna. I probably will call on you again in the future. I feel very selfish because it's always like I'm scribbling away and like gaining all this stuff about it. And I kind of loved what you said about Ghazali writing against specific philosophers rather than philosophy in general. I just thought that really struck me. And it's like, for me, when I teach about him, I say that like, he's like, you can take it so far, but don't cross the line sort of thing. There's a certain line, and lots of my students have this idea, you can question, but don't go beyond this parameter, but this bit's fine to do, but there's a sort of level, and like not throwing the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing. I just thought that was brilliant. And this link to Sufism, I think, has brought a lot of us here, because it's I had no idea that he wrote so much against Sufism, actually. I wondered if what his view is on the kind of, in our spec, we have like drunken Sufism and sober Sufism. So
Absolutely.
Is that what he's criticizing?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. This was one of the idea that he, like, you are Sufis, keep it yourself, and not to show that your relations with God, or you are a seeker to God. So like he did, he was disappeared. Yes, he said the solution, but he's not like showing or posing his state of Sufism or spirituality. So he was with this idea that keep it to yourself, and this is a matter between you and God. And therefore he was a big opposition to Sufi practices, Sufi gatherings, Sufi way of distinguishing themselves from the people, the way they wear, the way they dress, the way they treat their, so he is a big treat their like saints, let's say, or this idea of saints, he is not agreeing with it at all. So yes, absolutely, yeah. So
we've had someone like, we just want to kind of explore this a bit. So he does become a mystic, and he does have this experience, and his father was Sufi, I think you said at the beginning.
His brother
was Sufi. So is that why he's considered an advocate of Sufism? Because he at least allows it a bit.
Absolutely.
Okay. Whereas, you know, when you said Salafi, Sufi, I was like, crikey, because my idea of Salafism is that they don't accept Sufism. And it's not, you know, and I often think of Tim Winter, who's either in your department or connected to you, isn't he? As like a kind of modern, is that right to say he's like a bit of a modern day Ghazali, where he's like quite traditional, but got his Sufism as well. Chris is also wondering if he had a relationship with a Sufi master, did he go down that route or not? Or what is it to say he's Sufi, I guess?
So the first teacher for Imam al-Ghazali was a Sufi teacher, a very spiritual teacher. He has two teachers, Radkani and Ibn Siraj. One of them was, let's say, traditionalist, where he's focused on fiqh and ijtihad and maqasid, no maqasid of this, he invented this. So, but he was focusing on legal theory and all of philosophy perhaps. And Al-Ghazali would say that at the way home, I would pass by this beautiful area that is full of like flowers and lakes and birds. And so engaging in this legal theory or jurist work is very, very tough work, very sophisticated. He was eager to have this type of knowledge, the spirituality, the Sufism. He was grown up with a Sufi lover, his father. He was living with his brother Ahmad, who is known more in the realm of also Sufism. And he is a Persian poet. He is very, very, unlike Al-Ghazali, by the way, in Iran now, he is very, very respected for his Persian poet, unlike Al-Ghazali, because we know Al-Ghazali refutes Shi'ism, and so it's understandable. So they don't really appreciate Al-Ghazali, but they do appreciate Ahmad al-Ghazali, and he is very, very common, famous story, and he's very, very respected in Persia now. And so yes, Sufism was there. He is aware of Sufism. He is aware of, but he is not equating spirituality with Sufism or mysticism with Sufism.
Okay.
So Sufism is one practice. Sufism was there before Al-Ghazali, was there at the time of Prophet Muhammad. Sufism, most scholars would, even Ibn Taymiyyah. So Ibn Taymiyyah is a Salafi scholar. Is or considered a Salafi. So back then there was no Salafi and this classification, but he is really regarded a high scholar or highly appreciated by Salafis. But he has some Sufi aspect in his personality. He is Ibn Qayyim also. Although he is considered to be Wahhabi or Salafi, he also have some Sufi aspects. So all of these scholars, they appreciated Sufism, but they disagreed with lots of Sufis practices, including Imam al-Ghazali, who is harshly criticized Sufism. Despite his brother was Sufism, it was not his path before. So he was focused on knowledge, then spirituality came later.
So the idea of mysticism, he thinks is important, but not some of the practices that have come along with the Sufi forms of mysticism, but the idea of having that mystical element to your faith. But he doesn't necessarily agree with how Sufis are going about that.
Absolutely.
Okay, because I sort of Sufism is Islamic mysticism, but this is a different way to be a mystic to being a Sufi, I guess.
Absolutely. This is one way to look at it, that he has his own understanding of mysticism. His book, for example, Al-Madina University in Saudi Arabia, teaches his book. They teach his book in the curriculum, Ihya Ulumuddin, even though many Salafi scholars would consider Salafi in the modern time, would consider Imam al-Ghazali to be not trusted scholar because his understanding of mysticism. But he is traditionalist first and foremost. He is a jurist first and foremost, and even his understanding of mysticism was quite moderate. So he is not abandoning knowledge and abandoning, let's say, working in politician, abandoning all of these. And he is not abandoning also spirituality and the heart. And that's he is in between. Some Sufi sects and some Sufi at the time of Imam al-Ghazali were just staying like these Darwishism and staying in their places, singing, doing their recitation, worshipping, dancing. And this is what Imam al-Ghazali opposed. He would consider knowledge to be first, and then Sufism or mysticism is something that every Muslim should have, or every Muslim should engage with to find like indubitable knowledge.
Did he have a quote? I think he did. I do with my students, of like seeing with two eyes or with both eyes. So like holding the both together. So you need to sort of have the law and the law and the love, I guess, or something like that. You know, you've got to have the both. Yeah. We've also got a question here about what about a tolerance of the minorities in early Islam? So I guess that's you know, the minority religions that were in the Islamic State, the early Islamic states, and the sort of, I'm thinking of the jizya tax. I guess we have the NOCR, the I've forgotten the word. The Damis, is it called Damis? Yeah, the people who are like minorities who are protected. What was his view of that?
So Ahl al-Dhimma, do you mean? Dhimmis, yeah. So
yeah, Dhimmis, that's
all
it, yeah.
Of what we mentioned today, yeah, absolutely. All of what we mentioned today is under the, let's say, category of intellectual debate. So all of these debates and let's say intellectual fighting and intellectual publication, all of this was just intellectually. There is nothing beyond that. So there was in regard of tolerance, with regard of acceptance, with regard of rights, with regard of people live in pluralism. For those who ask about pluralism, absolutely, they live together. But at a political level and at intellectual level, there was a lot of tension between them all the time until this day. So at the intellectual level, Imam al-Ghazali, and it's fascinating to find that it's still relevant to this day. That's why when I read the Deliverance from Error, I said it's still very, very much relevant to today's, all of these thoughts and ideas that we encounter today, whether internally inside Islam itself or externally, thoughts that comes from outside the realm of Islam or Muslim sects and groups. So yes, there was lots of tolerance. There was tolerance, of course, and there was rights for Ahl al-Dhimma or minority. In Iran, they were minorities. Sunni were minorities. Outside Iran, like today, Shia, or in Egypt, it was predominantly Shia, Fatimites already. So in Iraq, it was predominantly Shia. So yeah, so there was all of this. We are talking only on the intellectual debate, intellectual tension, not beyond that.
He wasn't, well, yeah, he wasn't really advocating, I guess we're going to say, violence, but he's quite strong in his words about to do with apostasy. I keep bringing it back to that because I'm like, Ghazali when I'm teaching, and then I get to the apostasy bit and I'm like, oh, yeah, freedom of religion, you know, there's no compulsion of religion, but according to Ghazali, if you, you know, isn't it, if you're trying to convert people to Shia Islam, you should be executed, basically. Yeah. And to me, I feel like, okay, that's, I don't know whether that does show a great tolerance of those are different, but I always put it in that context of it being a time where that was a political threat, and you know, it was the sort of that was that. And also I realized that was a question someone was asking for topics for us in the future. Sorry, obviously, although I think we could put Al-Ghazali into every topic, couldn't we? And things about Islam and the state, secularism, Sharia again. We talked a lot about Sharia as well, but I think that'd be good to do more in one of these topics, wouldn't it? Islam and the state in Europe. Yeah, there's quite a lot for that's quite OCR heavy. I wonder if Najina and Chris, you both teach OCR, don't you, as well? I think you do. Let me see here. Yes, yeah, great. Okay, so I think we'll look at that. But honestly, Yomna, that's just that's really helped me think about Ghazali, how he fits in, how he's been misrepresented. I used that video of Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, I
used the beginning bit where he talks about the naming of the stars in Arabic. Yeah, and there's this video where he says, you know, about the flourishing and all the, you know, the influence of Arabic culture and the way, and then I pause it at that bit where he says that Ghazali is responsible for the downfall, and I think he has been unfairly like labelled as like shutting down discussion or philosophy in Islam. I think it's really unfair. But I wonder if it's like a legacy of some of the things he said. I often think maybe some of the things he said have then been taken by others to shut down discussion.
Yeah.
And I have got students who say, oh, I'm not allowed to question. No, I can't. I'm not allowed to question, you know. And it's not Islamic to question and ask these things. And I'm like, Muslim scholars have asked these questions, you know. And I used to have a poster on my wall of a book that says, if from a Muslim scholar said, even the angels asked. I said, look, even the angels who don't have free will asked questions to God, you know. And that's how we learn and how we have knowledge. But there's many students who sort of come from, I don't know, a perspective where you can't question. What if it means you're going to question and go too far? And I sort of think for Ghazali, it's like, well, you can question, but just don't go too far. But the questioning bit's fine, you know. Yeah, let's have a look here, see what else we've got here. Thank you. It's helped me a lot, Al-Ghazali. Yeah, this is brilliant. I'm just so happy, Yomna, that you came and you gave up all that time, and this video will hopefully help others as well. I'm amazed that we've had our very first after 2 years. That's great. Yeah, after our first ever A-level actual student age person coming. It's brilliant. Makes me think we need to do more for younger students as well. And yeah, I just want to thank everybody, and thanks again, Yomna.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for having
And I'll
me.
be in touch with you again soon. And yeah, just let me know, everyone, if there's any questions you have, and I'll oh, brilliant. I'm so happy. Do you actually study philosophy? I didn't know whether
I study religious studies.
Oh, brilliant.
We do Christianity though at my school.
But, you know, obviously you can still bring in, what exam board do you do it with? Do you know which board?
OCR.
Oh, you do OCR. Yes, of course you can bring in, yeah. That link with Descartes, you've got that in the philosophy, haven't you? The ancient philosophical influences. Yeah. You've got
have an open day. We have an open day. Just, I'm sorry for interrupting you. We have an open day in, and the divinity also open day. I think next week.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, next week, and would love to have you. Yeah. So that would be
okay.
Yeah.
Do you want? Yomna, do you want to put your? How can we contact you? Is there an email address?
Yeah. So here is my email address. I will type it here, and would love to have you. So you are 12, year 12?
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant.
Chris, Regina, we've got to get our students here now. Now we can sort of say to them, hey, there was a year 12 in this meeting we went to learning about Al-Ghazali. We could get them to come along too, couldn't we? Oh, that's so good. Absolutely. Honestly,
yeah,
your teacher
I had my students attend another event, which they did over Zoom as well. But this one was because we gave them early study leave and stuff. So I couldn't organize this.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'm sure
this would have been amazing. Yeah.
I just think, yeah, it's really good for us, really good for the students. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we can think about that more for in the future. Maybe we could do something that's kind of, yes, interesting. Oh, I'm just so, your teacher is just very, okay, maybe we could do that. Maybe in the autumn, it could be some.
Maybe we could put something in together for a revision for next year. For year 13, so we all come together on this forum and do revision for all of our
yes, and that would have to be quite spec specific, I guess, because obviously that we could do an OCR A-level students revision, because most of us are OCR, aren't we? That would be brilliant. And then maybe even earlier, it could be like subject knowledge for those kids who are like just going into year 13 in the autumn, who may be trying to hope that they might pick to do philosophy at A-level, at degree level, or kind of push their thinking a bit. You know, we always have a few, maybe, okay. Oh, fantastic. Oh, thank you so much.
What you think about this idea, but doing something specific for year 11 students at some point, to encourage them to take up philosophy and ethics.
Yes,
for
that would be really
maybe
good.
we could think about something on that one.
Okay, so we're going to have teachers year 11, year 12, year 13. And then should we go down to, like, you know, year 6s? I'm actually living in France now, trying to but I mentor my kids. I'm the academic mentor with our kids in London, so I meet with them online and do mentoring with them, and I know lots of other things, but I'm trying to like find ways of teaching philosophy and religion here, but it's just not part of what we do. So I'm trying to set up ways of like get these discussions going, because I'm like hankering to talk about it again, you know. But yeah, we'll see how I can do that. All right, well, should we say goodbye, let everybody go? And Yomna, you've given up your time when it's even your holiday. Like, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I was really pleased to be with you this evening.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you so much for coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.